Tom's boots dragged in the faint scent of motor oil as he slumped into the dining chair, the warmth of their modest Austin, Texas, home wrapping around him like a worn blanket. The Super Bowl blared from the living room TV, a ritual since his stepson Cody's first Pee Wee football game 7 years ago, the same TV he'd mounted after a grueling double shift at the auto shop, his knuckles still raw from wrestling a rusted carburetor off a client's Dodge. The ache in his hands paled compared to the hollow pang in his chest as he glanced across the table at Laura, her auburn hair glowing under the pendant light he'd installed 2 summers back, her jaw clenched, her hazel eyes sharp with a resentment he couldn't trace. Cody, 24, sprawled in his chair, cracking open a Bud Light. His younger brother Nate, 21, scrolled TikTok on his phone, both oblivious to the storm brewing. Tom had poured 2 decades into raising them after their biological dad vanished. Leaving Laura a single mum with 2 boys under 5, he'd taught Cody how to throw a spiral in the backyard, stayed up through Nate's asthma attacks with a nebulizer humming in the dark. He'd paid for Cody's trade school tuition, Nate's community college fees, even sold his dad's prized 1968 Chevy Camaro to cover Nate's hospital bill after a car accident. 2 years ago, he missed his niece's baptism in Houston to fix a neighbor's AC during a 104-degree heat wave, all while Laura worked part-time at the local library, leaving Tom to be the rock, the fixer, the one who kept the house from crumbling. He'd rebuilt the porch after a storm, repainted the kitchen last summer, even carved pumpkins with the boys for Halloween on that same table. But tonight, the air felt different, heavy with unspoken accusations. Laura slammed her fork down mid-bite, the sharp clink cutting through the roar of the Super Bowl crowd. Tom, you need to stop acting like you own this place. Either apologize to Cody for that rent nonsense or get out of my house. Her voice wasn't a scream, but a cold, deliberate verdict slicing through the kitchen he'd repainted in her favorite sage green. Cody smirked, popping a piece of brisket into his mouth. Yeah, Tom, chill, you're not my dad. I'm not paying rent to crash here, I'll move out when I'm ready. His tone dripped with entitlement, as if the free beer, the Wi-Fi, the roof over his head were owed to him. Nate didn't look up from his phone, just snorted. Eviction notice much? Lay off, man. The words hit Tom like a slap. His mind raced through the sacrifices, the late nights fixing leaks in the dead of winter, the early mornings driving Cody to football practice in the pouring rain, the way he skipped his own veteran-s reunion to help Laura's mom move into assisted living. He was 58, a Vietnam vet with a limp that throbbed when the humidity spiked. His hands bore scars from years of turning wrenches. His heart bore scars from years of silence. He'd rebuilt this family from the ground up, piece by piece. And now he was the outsider. Laura's gaze drilled into him, unyielding, her lips a thin line. I mean it, Tom. Apologize or leave. I won't have you disrespecting my boys in my house. Her boys, not theirs. The distinction landed like a gut punch. He saw the exit sign in her eyes, a plan she'd kept hidden for God knows how long. The realization seared through him. He'd been a guest in his own life, a tenant on borrowed time. He set his fork down gently, the brisket untouched, its juices pooling on the plate like a slow bleed. He stood, his chair scraping the hardwood floor he'd sanded and stained himself after a pipe burst 3 years ago. The TV erupted in cheers for a touchdown, a cruel mockery of the silence at the table. He looked at Laura one last time, her face expectant, waiting for him to grovel, to back down like he always had. But something inside him snapped. He turned, his boots clicking on the tile he'd laid after that same pipe burst, each step a memory of labor, of love, of a life he'd poured into this family. He walked to the front door, the screen creaking as he stepped into the humid Texas night, the air thick with the scent of mesquite smoke from a neighbor's grill and the promise of distant rain. He didn't slam the door, didn't yell, didn't give them the satisfaction of a dramatic exit. He just let the quiet speak for him. He heard Laura mutter, "He'll be back, he always comes back," as Cody laughed. "Give him an hour, he's just pouting." But their voices faded as he reached his Ford pickup, the one he'd driven to every football game, every ER visit, every late-night run to Home Depot for emergency supplies. He climbed in, the engine rumbling to life, the seat creaking under his weight like an old friend who knew too much. He didn't look back. The house lights glowed behind him, a life he'd built with his own hands. now a stage for his quiet departure. He drove toward the horizon, the Super Bowl cheers fading into the hum of the road, leaving only the weight of a betrayal he hadn't seen coming, the stars above the Texas sky flickering faintly, witnesses to a man who'd given everything, now choosing himself for the first time in decades. The hum of the Ford Pickup S engine filled the night as Tom drove away from the glowing lights of his Austin home, the Super Bowl cheers fading into a distant murmur, replaced by the rhythmic thud of tires on asphalt. The Texas sky stretched endlessly above, a canvas of stars that seemed to mock his unraveling world. He didn't have a destination, just a need to escape the suffocating weight of betrayal that clung to him like damp heat. The cab smelled of old coffee and grease, a scent that had always grounded him, but now it felt like a reminder of the life he'd poured into a family that didn't see him. His hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, the same hands that had fixed Cody's first bike when he crashed it into a ditch, the same hands that had held Nate during midnight asthma attacks, rocking him until the wheezing stopped, the same hands that had rebuilt the porch swing Laura loved after a storm tore it apart. He drove past the familiar streets of their suburban neighborhood, past the park where he'd pushed the boys on swings until his arms burned, past the diner where he and Laura had shared late-night pecan pie after Cody's first football win, each landmark a stitch in the tapestry of a life he'd thought was his, but now felt like a borrowed dream. He turned onto a back road, the pavement cracked and uneven leading toward Lake Travis, a spot he hadn't visited in years. The lake where he'd taught Cody and Nate to fish, where Cody had caught his first base and Nate had cried when his hook snagged a turtle instead of a fish. Tom had spent hours untangling lines, baiting hooks, telling stories of his Air Force days to keep them entertained. He parked near the water's edge, the crooked dock still jutting out like a broken finger, the moonlight glinting off the ripples he killed the engine, the silence rushing in like a wave. He leaned back in the seat, the leather creaking under his weight, his eyes tracing the roof of the cab. A faded photo of Laura and the boys tucked into the visor, taken at a county fair 10 years ago. Laura's smile wide, the boys clinging to cotton candy. Tom had won them a stuffed bear that day, his arm sore from tossing rings. He pulled the photo down, his thumb brushing over their faces, a lump rising in his throat. He'd been their rock, their provider, their fixer, but tonight he was nothing, a ghost in his own story. He folded the photo and tucked it into his jacket pocket, the weight of it heavier than the paper itself. He stepped out of the truck, the night air cool against his skin, carrying the scent of algae and damp earth. He walked to the dock, his boots thudding on the warped wood, each step echoing the rhythm of his racing heart. He sat on the edge legs dangling over the water, the same spot where he'd once held Cody's hand as he reeled in that base, the boys' laughter ringing in his ears, now replaced by the hollow sound of lapping waves. He thought of Laura's cold ultimatum, her words replaying like a broken record. Apologize or leave. And Cody's smirk, Nate's indifference, the betrayal cut deeper than any wound he'd taken in Vietnam. He'd survived ambushes, monsoons, the loss of comrades. But this quiet dismissal from the family he'd built, felt like a death he couldn't outrun. He pulled a crumpled pack of Marlboros from his pocket, a habit he'd kicked years ago but kept for emergencies. He lit one, the flame briefly illuminating his weathered face, the smoke curling into the night as he exhaled a shaky breath. He didn't cry, he couldn't. The hurt was too deep for tears. Instead, he felt a hollow ache, a void where his purpose had been. He'd spent decades fixing things, cars, houses, lives. But he couldn't fix this. He couldn't fix the way they'd erased him. He thought of the Ford, the truck that had carried them through every crisis, from hauling Cody's football gear to driving Laura's mum to chemo appointments. The same truck he'd slept in during a blizzard to make sure he got to the shop the next day. He'd always been the one to stay, to endure, to make things work. But now, for the first time, he was the one leaving. He flicked the cigarette into the lake, the ember hissing as it hit the water. He stood his limp, more pronounced in the cool air, and walked back to the truck. He didn't pack a bag, didn't take anything from the house. Because you don't pack when you're not leaving. You just go. He climbed back into the cab, the engine roaring to life. He drove north, the lake fading in his rearview mirror, the road stretching into darkness, each mile a step away from the life he'd known, the life that had discarded him. He didn't know where he was going, but he knew he couldn't go back, not to the house, not to the family, not to the man he'd been the stars above, watched in silence, bearing witness to a man who'd given everything now, driving into the unknown, carrying nothing but the weight of his own worth, a worth he was only beginning to understand. The house on Willow Lane fell into an uneasy quiet after Tom's departure, the Super Bowl still flickering on the TV, its cheers a hollow echo against the tension that hung like a storm cloud. Laura sat at the dining table, her fork abandoned beside the congealing brisket, her hands trembling slightly as she stared at the empty chair where Tom had been. The sage-green walls he'd painted seemed to close in, mocking her with their perfection. Cody lounged back in his seat, popping another Bud Light, his smirk fading into a lazy grin. "Well, that was dramatic, huh? He'll be back by halftime, just wait," he said, his voice casual as if Tom's exit was a predictable tantrum. Nate glanced up from his phone, his thumbs pausing on the screen. "Yeah, he always does this. Storms off to cool down. Remember when he left for 2 days after Cody dented the truck?" he added, a faint chuckle escaping. Laura nodded absently, wiping a stray tear from her cheek. "He's just blowing off steam. He can't stay mad, not with the garage and all," she murmured, her tone firm but laced with doubt. She stood, clearing the plates with mechanical precision, the clatter of dishes a stark contrast to the silence Tom had left behind. She told herself he'd return after a night at a cheap motel, maybe the one by the highway with the flickering neon sign. He always came back, didn't he? The next morning, the house felt off. The coffee maker sat unplugged, a task Tom handled every dawn. The sink dripped with a rhythm he'd fixed last week. Laura called his name into the empty rooms, her voice bouncing back unanswered. Cody stumbled downstairs, bleary-eyed. "He's still not here. Man, he's really milking this," he laughed, raiding the fridge for leftover brisket. Nate joined, shrugging. "Probably at the lake. You know how he gets with that fishing crap." They assumed he'd reappear with a sheepish grin, ready to apologize. Laura checked her phone. No texts, no calls, just the usual notifications from her library shift schedule. She sent a quick message. "Tom, come home, we'll talk." But the blue checkmark never turned green. The day dragged on. The boys played video games, their laughter grating on Laura's nerves. She tried to focus on her library prep, but her mind kept drifting to Tom's limp. The way he'd winced last week after a long day. She wondered if he'd taken his pain meds. The thought gnawed at her. By evening, Cody suggested ordering pizza. "Dad's not here to grill, might as well," he joked, the word "dad" slipping out before he corrected himself. Laura's heart twisted. She forced a smile. "Sure, get extra pepperoni." But inside a seed of worry sprouted. Tuesday came and still no Tom. The garage phone rang off the hook, clients asking for their cars. Laura fumbled with the appointment book, a chaotic scribble of Tom's handwriting. She didn't know where to start. Cody offered to help. "I can call them, tell them Dad's out," he said, but his tone lacked conviction. Nate rolled his eyes. "Good luck. He never taught us that system." Laura called Tom's friend Mike, a fellow vet who'd shared beers with him at the VFW. "Mike, have you seen Tom?" "He's been gone since Sunday," her voice cracked. Mike paused. "No, Laura, last I saw him was at the poker night. He seemed off, said something about needing space." The news unsettled her. She tried her sister in San Antonio. "Hey, has Tom called you?" she asked. Her sister replied, "No, why? Trouble in paradise?" Laura forced a laugh. "Just a spat. He'll cool off." But the lie tasted bitter. Wednesday morning, the Wi-Fi went down. Cody cursed, trying to reset the router. "Tom always fixed this crap," he muttered. Laura stood in the kitchen staring at the junk drawer where Tom kept screws, fuses, and a notepad of passwords. She opened it, the chaos overwhelming. She couldn't find the router code. The house felt like a stranger's now, Thursday. The AC sputtered, a heat wave creeping in. Laura sweated through her blouse. "He'd have fixed this by now," she whispered. The boys bickered over the thermostat, their voices rising. She called the shop again. A client yelled about a late oil change. She hung up, hands shaking. The family's routine unraveled. Laura's confidence waned. She'd always seen Tom as the background noise, the fixer who didn't need praise. But his absence exposed the cracks. Cody and Nate grew restless, their jokes turning sour. "Maybe he finally ditched us," Cody said, half serious. Laura snapped, "Enough, he'll be back. He'll But her voice lacked the certainty it once had. The Super Bowl replay looped on TV, a reminder of the night it all broke. Laura sat alone that night, the house creaking, the drip of the sink a constant taunt. She dialed Tom's number straight to voicemail. "Tom, please, this is silly. Come home," she pleaded. But the silence on the other end was deafening. She didn't sleep, her mind racing with images of him stranded, hurt. Or worse, the boys snored upstairs, oblivious. The house stood as a monument to a life she'd taken for granted. And for the first time, Laura felt the weight of his absence, a weight she couldn't lift alone. The air in the Willow Lane house grew thick with tension as the days stretched into a week without Tom. The Super Bowl replay, looping on the TV, a cruel reminder of the night, everything shattered. Laura stood in the kitchen, her hands trembling as she stared at the overflowing sink. The garbage disposal jammed with potato peels she'd tried to force down, a task Tom had handled with a quick twist of a wrench every time it clogged. The drip, drip, drip of the faucet he'd promised to fix echoed like a heartbeat, mocking her helplessness. Cody shuffled in, shirt stained with motor oil from a half-hearted attempt to fix his truck. "Mum, the Wi-Fi's still down and the router's making this weird buzzing sound," he grumbled, tossing a wrench onto the counter with a clang. Nate followed, his face flushed from wrestling with the lawnmower. "I tried starting it, but it just sputtered and died. Tom always knew how to kick it back to life," he said, his voice tinged with frustration. Laura's chest tightened. She'd always seen Tom as the background hum, the man who fixed leaks before they flooded, who replaced bulbs before they burned out, who kept the garage running like a well-oiled machine. But now, his absence exposed the fragility of their world. She opened the junk drawer, a chaotic mess of screws, fuses, and a crumpled notepad with Tom's scribbled passwords. She rifled through it, her fingers shaking, but the Wi-Fi code was missing. The garage login a mystery. She called the shop. A client's angry voice barked through. "Where's Tom? My Chevy's been sitting there 3 days." She stammered. "He's taking time off." Her lie fragile. The man hung up, leaving her with a dial tone. Cody tried to step in. "I'll handle the garage. I've watched Dad enough," he said. But his attempt to reorder parts online ended in a $200 mistake, counterfeit oil filters from a shady website. Laura's phone buzzed with a bank alert. The mortgage payment overdue. She rifled through bills on the counter, realizing Tom had always paid them with a quiet efficiency she'd never noticed. She didn't know the account passwords. The checkbook was gone, hidden in some system only Tom understood. Thursday night. The AC sputtered out, the Texas heat creeping in. Laura sweated through her nightgown. "He'd have fixed this by now," she whispered. Nate tried resetting it, but the pilot light refused to catch. They opened windows, the humidity suffocating. Cody snapped, "If Tom were here, we wouldn't be roasting." Laura's resolve cracked. She called her brother Mark in Dallas. "Mark, have you heard from Tom? He's been gone since Sunday." Her voice broke. Mark sighed. "No, sis. Last I knew he was stressed. Said the boys were taking him for granted. Maybe he needed a break." The words stung. She tried Mike again. "Any sign of him?" Mike's voice was flat. "Nope, but if he wanted you to find him, you would have." The rejection fueled her panic. Friday, the garage phone rang non-stop. A client threatened to tow his truck. Laura fumbled with the appointment book, Tom's handwriting a labyrinth. She couldn't decipher his shorthand. Cody offered to drive over, but returned defeated. "The bay's a mess. Tools everywhere. I don't know where he kept the invoices," he admitted. Laura's hands shook as she opened the fridge. The milk sour, a chore Tom always handled. She dumped it, the stench hitting her like a slap. Saturday, the water heater failed. A cold shower left her shivering. Nate cursed. "Tom knew how to relight that damn thing." They called a plumber. 3 days out, Laura stood in the basement, staring at the furnace, remembering Tom's late-night checks, his quiet diligence. She'd teased him for it, calling him obsessive. Now she saw it as the backbone she'd ignored. The house began to crumble. A leaky pipe soaked the laundry room. Cody's attempt to patch it with duct tape failed. Water pooled on the floor. Nate slipped, yelling, "This is your fault, Mom. You drove him away." Laura's tears fell. She'd always thought Tom would return. his dependability a given. But now, the cracks widened. The garage lost 2 clients, a Yelp review called it unreliable. Laura's library friends noticed her haggard look. "Where's Tom?" they asked. She forced a smile. "Just a break." But her voice trembled. The boys' bickering grew. Cody blamed Nate for the mower. Nate accused Cody of wrecking the truck. Laura screamed, "Stop it!" But the chaos drowned her. She sat on the couch, the TV mute, the house a shell of what it was, Tom's absence a void that sucked the life out. She dialed his number again, voicemail. "Tom, please, we need you, I need you," she begged. But the silence was a wall, she realized too late. Tom wasn't just the fixer, he was the foundation, and without him everything was falling apart. Tom's Ford pickup rumbled along a dusty back road. The lights of Austin long faded in his rearview mirror, the Texas night giving way to a pale dawn as he crossed into a small town called Driftwood, a speck on the map with 1 gas station, a diner, and a repair shop that hadn't updated its sign since the 80s. He pulled into the gravel lot of Hank's Fix-It garage, the faded letters swinging in the breeze, the scent of burnt toast and motor oil stirring a memory of his father bringing him to a similar shop as a kid. Hank, a grizzled man with a limp worse than Tom's, sized him up with a squint. "Looking for work or trouble?" he asked, his voice gravelly. Tom managed a half-smile. "Work if you've got it, I'm good with engines." Hank nodded. "Room upstairs, cash only, keep it quiet," handing him a key that looked older than the building itself. Tom took it, the weight of it grounding him. The room was a shoebox with a sagging mattress, a single window streaked with grime, and a fridge that rattled like a dying lawnmower. He unpacked his duffel, 2 flannel shirts, a razor, a dog-eared copy of Lonesome Dove he'd meant to finish for years. For the first time in decades, he felt unburdened. No one to fix, no one to save, just himself. He started the next morning, sweeping the shop floor, organizing tools scattered like forgotten promises. Hank watched silently, then tossed him a carburetor. "Fix it, let's see what you've got." Tom worked methodically, his hands steady despite the ache in his joints, the hum of country music from an old radio filling the space. He finished in an hour. Hank grunted approval. "You're hired." The days settled into a rhythm. Tom fixed what came in, a widow's busted lawnmower, a kid's skateboard with a wobbly wheel, a farmer's tractor that coughed black smoke. He didn't charge much, often taking payment in peach cobbler or a jar of homemade pickles. The locals called him T, a nickname Hank gave him. Too lazy to say the full name. Tom didn't mind. It felt like a fresh start, a shedding of the man he'd been, the stepdad who'd been taken for granted, the fixer who'd been erased evenings. He sat behind the shop on a rickety bench, a thermos of black coffee in hand, the sunset painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. He'd watch the fireflies blink their light, a quiet comfort, a stark contrast to the chaos of Willow Lane. He thought of Laura and the boys less, their faces fading like an old photograph, replaced by new ones. Miss Clara, the diner owner who brought him pecan pie after he fixed her jukebox. Teenage brothers who hung around after school, eager to learn how to change a tire. Tom taught them with patience, his voice low, his words deliberate. Always check the pressure first, don't rush it. He'd say their eyes wide with respect, something he hadn't felt in years. Sundays. He walked to a nearby creek, a spot the locals fished. He didn't bring a rod, just sat on a rock. The water as murmur, a balm to his battered soul. He'd left his phone off, battery dead in the glove box. He didn't need the noise, the apologies, the drama. He'd found something better. Silence, a silence that didn't press on his chest like the one in Austin, but held him like a friend. He thought of his Air Force days, the missions that taught him resilience, the comrades he'd lost. He'd survived worse than a family's betrayal. But this peace felt like a victory, a reclaiming of himself. One evening, Miss Clara invited him to the diner for a town potluck, a small gathering with folding tables and mismatched chairs, the air thick with the scent of fried chicken and cornbread. Tom hesitated, but her warm smile drew him in. He sat with the locals, their laughter easy, their stories simple. Tales of cattle drives, broken fences, first loves. No one asked about his past. No one cared about the limp or the scars on his knuckles. They just passed him a plate. "Eat up, T, you're too skinny," Clara teased. He smiled, a real smile, the kind that reached his eyes. For the first time in months he felt seen. Not as a fixer, not as a stepdad, but as a man. The night ended with a bonfire, the crackle of wood, and the strum of a guitar filling the air. Tom sat by the flames, the heat warming his face. The stars above driftwood brighter than they'd ever been in Austin. He didn't need to check his phone, didn't need to wonder if Laura missed him. He'd built something here. A life that was his. Small, quiet, but real. The weight of Willow Lane lifted, replaced by the lightness of belonging. He sipped his coffee, the firelight dancing in his eyes. A man reborn in the ashes of the life he'd left behind. The Willow Lane house had become a battleground of chaos and regret by the second week of Tom's absence. The once cozy kitchen now a mess of unwashed dishes and sour milk cartons. The AC unit wheezed its last breath, leaving Laura drenched in sweat as she stood over the stove, trying to salvage a burnt casserole for dinner. The Super Bowl replay had been replaced by a static hum on the TV. A fitting soundtrack to the unraveling of her life, Cody and Nate bickered in the living room. Their voices sharp over a stalled video game. If Tom were here, this wouldn't be glitching. Cody snapped, tossing the controller. Nate shot back. Yeah, well, you didn't have to drive him off with your attitude. The accusation hung heavy. Laura's hands trembled as she scraped the charred remains into the trash, her mind racing with memories of Tom's quiet competence, the way he'd whisked eggs with one hand while fixing a leaky faucet with the other. She'd taken it for granted, dismissed it as routine. Now it was a gaping hole. She sank into a chair, the wood creaking under her weight, and pulled out her phone, the screen glowing with unanswered texts and voicemails. She scrolled through the list. 67 missed calls, 34 voicemails, some 62 texts, all from her. A desperate plea into the void. She dialed Tom's number again, the voicemail greeting his steady voice. Hey, it's Tom, leave a message. Cutting off with a beep. Tom, it's me, please pick up. I was wrong, the boys need you, I need you, the house is falling apart. Her voice cracked, the words tumbling out in a rush. She didn't hang up, letting the silence stretch, hoping he'd answer. But the line stayed dead. She saved the message, a lifeline she clung to. The next day she drove to the garage, the lot empty save for a few abandoned cars, the air thick with the smell of stale oil and neglect. She fumbled with the lock, the key sticking, a reminder of Tom's smooth entry inside. Tools lay scattered, invoices piled in a shoebox, a system she couldn't decode. She called Mike, her voice shaky. Mike, please, have you seen him? It's been 2 weeks, Mike sighed. Laura, I told you, he's gone dark. If he wanted contact, he'd call. Maybe he's done. The words hit like a punch. She tried her sister in San Antonio again. Jenna, any word? I'm losing it here. Jenna's voice softened. No, hun, but maybe he's at that lake he loved. Give him time. Laura clung to the hope, driving to Lake Travis that afternoon. The water calm, the dock empty. She sat where he'd taught the boys to fish, tears streaming as she dialed again. Tom, I'm at the lake. Please come home. I'll do anything. But the voicemail swallowed her words back home. The chaos worsened. The water heater leaked, soaking the basement. Cody's attempt to patch it with duct tape failed miserably. Water pooled. Nate slipped, cursing. This is a disaster, Mom, Laura sobbed. I know. The pressure mounted. She wrote a letter, her pen scratching on cheap stationery. Tom, you win. Come back. We can't do this without you. She sealed it, unsure where to send it. She drove to the post office, asking the clerk, Can you hold this for Tom if he comes by? The clerk raised an eyebrow. No address. She shook her head, tears falling. The letter sat unclaimed. Thursday, the garage lost another client. A Yelp review blasted poor service. Laura's library co-workers noticed her red eyes. Laura, what's wrong? They asked. She forced a smile. Family stuff. But the mask slipped. She called Mark again. Mark! I'm begging, find him. Mark's voice was grim. I'll ask around. But Laura, he might not want to be found. The rejection fueled her desperation. She scoured Tom's old haunts, the VFW, the hardware store, even the diner where they shared pie. No one had seen him. Her voicemails grew frantic. Tom, the boys are fighting. The house is a wreck. I can sleep, please. One ended with a sob saved like a prayer. Cody tried calling. Dad, if this is a lesson, we get it. Come back. His voice lacked sincerity. Nate left a quiet plea. Tom, I'm sorry. Just call Mom. But the silence persisted. Laura stood in the garage, staring at the pegboard where Tom's tool belt hung, gone now. The calendar marked with oil changes and supplier notes. Her fingers traced the empty space. A sob escaping. She realized he'd taken it intentionally, leaving her to face the void. The house groaned under neglected repairs. The fridge buzzed erratically. The lights flickered, each floor a testament to his absence. She sat on the porch that night, the wind carrying the scent of mesquite. Her phone in hand, she replayed his voicemail. His voice a ghost. "Tom, I was wrong, I see it now, please give us a chance," she whispered, but the stars above offered no reply. The weight of her mistake crushed her. She'd thought him weak for staying now. She saw his strength in leaving the family she'd built with him was crumbling, and her efforts to pull him back were slipping through her fingers like sand. The hum of the Ford pickup cut through the quiet Texas night as Tom steered back toward Austin, the road stretching beneath him like a lifeline he'd once clung to. The stars above Driftwood had guided him for weeks, but now they seemed to fade, urging him toward a reckoning he couldn't avoid. It had been a month since he'd left Willow Lane, a month of peace in Driftwood, fixing engines and sipping coffee by the creek. But a restless pull tugged at him, a need to close the chapter he'd left open. He didn't bring much, just a thermos of black coffee, the weight of his decision and the tools that had defined his life. The truck rumbled into the familiar driveway, the cracked concrete glowing under the porch light he'd installed. The wind chime he'd hung after a storm clinked faintly, missing a note. The house loomed smaller now, its tired frame a shadow of the home he'd built. He stepped out, his boots crunching on the gravel, the air thick with the scent of mesquite and the faint tang of rust from the garage. He let himself in, the front door squeaking on hinges he'd oiled a dozen times. The living room was a war zone, empty pizza boxes, a toppled lamp. Cody sprawled on the couch, controller in hand, his eyes widening as Tom's silhouette filled the doorway. "Tom?" he croaked, frozen, spoon halfway to his mouth. Tom nodded once, his face a mask of calm. He didn't speak, didn't linger. Moving past the kitchen where the sage-green walls bore a scorch mark from Laura's failed casserole. Past the hall closet where he'd stored storm gear they'd never touched, down to the basement workshop. The light flickered as he flipped the switch, the air damp with neglect. His tool chest sat where he'd left it, scratched from a clumsy attempt to move it. He opened the drawers, metric wrenches on the left, standard on the right, torque tools wrapped in rags like relics. He lifted the chest, the weight familiar, a part of him. He turned to the pegboard, taking down 3 framed photos. One of Laura from their trip to Galveston before the boys, her smile radiant, one of Cody and Nate fishing at Lake Travis, their grins genuine, and one of his father, sparks flying behind them at a welding job, his hand on Tom's shoulder. Lastly, he knelt by the old army green footlocker, lifting out a velvet case with his Vietnam medals. Untouched, a piece of his past no one had asked about. He paused, surveying the room, tempted to leave a note, a final word. But no, they didn't deserve closure. This was his inventory, not theirs. He carried the chest upstairs, each step deliberate. Cody still stared silent, spoon suspended. Nate emerged from the kitchen, eyes wide. "Tom, you're back?" he whispered. Tom shook his head, a faint "no," and kept moving. He set the chest by the door, his gaze sweeping the house one last time. The chipped tile from Cody's chair stunt, the creaky stairs he'd reinforced, the life he'd poured into this place, now a stranger's domain. He walked out, the screen door whispering shut. No slam, no drama, just the click of his boots fading into the night. Laura pulled into the garage moments later, arms full of grocery bags, muttering about traffic. The hum of the fridge and the flicker of the overhead light she'd ignored greeted her. She didn't notice at first, dropping the bags on the counter, a jar of pickles shattering, the sharp smell of vinegar mixing with the tension. Then she saw it, a plain envelope on the table, her name in Tom's neat handwriting, a script she hadn't seen in weeks. Her breath caught, she sank into a chair, hands trembling as she tore it open. Inside, a check for half the garage's value, cashed out clean. No strings beneath it, the deed to the house signed over, no lawyers, no loopholes, and a single note on lined paper, the kind he'd used for grocery lists. "You said apologize or leave. I chose to remember who I was before I begged to be seen." No signature. The words hit like a freight train. The check fluttered to the floor, the deed slid beside it. Laura's knees buckled, she slid to the ground, sobbing. Not the pretty tears of a movie, but raw guttural cries. Her body shaking as the reality crashed over her. Cody and Nate rushed in. "Mom, what's wrong?" they asked. But she couldn't answer. the weight of her mistake suffocating. She'd thought him weak for staying, a tool to lean on. Now she saw his strength in walking away, taking everything that mattered, his tools, his memories, his dignity. The house stood silent, a monument to her blindness. The boys hovered helpless, their bickering silenced. Laura clutched the note, her tears smudging the ink. She realized Tom wasn't punishing her. He was freeing himself, and in that freedom he'd left her to face the ruin she'd created. The night stretched on, the wind chime's broken note a mournful echo, the stars above indifferent, bearing witness to a woman undone by the man she'd never truly seen. The Willow Lane house stood like a hollow shell in the weeks following Tom's final departure. The check and deed still scattered on the kitchen floor, where Laura had collapsed, her sobs echoing off the sage-green walls now streaked with her tears. The wind chime outside clinked its broken note, a constant reminder of the man who'd hung it. The garage sat silent, its tools and memories gone with Tom. Leaving behind a husk of rust and unpaid bills, Laura moved through the days in a daze, her library shifts a blur of forced smiles and whispered questions from co-workers. "Laura, you look awful. Where's Tom?" they'd ask, her voice cracked each time. "He's gone." The word a knife. Cody and Nate stumbled through their routines, their bickering replaced by a sullen silence. The video game console gathered dust. The truck Cody had dented sat untouched, its hood rusted from neglect. The house groaned under its own weight. The leaky pipe in the basement had spread soaking boxes of old photos, wedding shots of Laura and her first husband, faded Polaroids of Cody's first steps, Nate's preschool art, all ruined. Laura salvaged what she could, her hands trembling as water dripped onto the floor. The plumber finally arrived, his estimate a staggering $1,200, a cost Tom would have avoided with a quick fix. She stared at the check Tom left, its value mocking her inability to manage. The garage phone rang incessantly, clients demanding refunds. Yelp reviews piled up. "Worst service ever, abandoned my car," one read. Laura tried to answer, her voice breaking. "I'm sorry, we're closing," she lied. The business Tom built crumbling under her hands. Cody attempted to take over, wrench in hand, but stripped a bolt on a client's engine, costing them another $300. Nate's lawnmower repair ended with a blade flying off, nearly hitting him. Their helplessness mirrored Laura's. She sat on the porch each night, the mesquite-scented breeze a cruel comfort. Her phone replayed Tom's voicemail, his steady voice a ghost she couldn't let go. "Hey, it's Tom, leave a message," she'd whisper back. "I see it now, I was blind." But the line stayed dead. The boys drifted, Cody crashed with a friend, Nate moved to a dorm with savings he'd never earned. The house emptied, its silence deafening. Laura's library friends organized a casserole train, their kindness a lifeline. But each dish reminded her of Tom's grill mastery. She'd cry into the foil trays, the weight of her mistake crushing. She visited Lake Travis, sitting on the dock where Tom had taught the boys. The water lapped gently. Mocking her solitude, she called his number again. Voicemail. "Tom, I'm sorry. The house is gone. The boys are gone. It's all my fault." Her voice broke. She threw the phone into the lake, a symbolic end. Back home she found a letter from the bank. Foreclosure looming the deed. Tom signed her only anchor. She'd lost everything. Her home, her sons, respect, her pride. The realization hit like a storm. She'd seen Tom as a fixture, a stepdad to lean on, not a man with his own soul. His silence wasn't punishment. It was liberation. And her blindness had cost her everything. She drove to Driftwood, asking at Hank's Fix-It garage. The old man squinted. "T? He's around, keeps to himself," he said, but wouldn't say more. Laura left a note. "Tom, I understand now. Forgive me." It sat unclaimed. She returned to Austin, the house dark, its sale pending. She sat in the empty living room, the wind chime's broken note her only company. Her tears fell onto the hardwood Tom had sanded. She whispered, "I loved you and I didn't know." The lesson sank in. Respect is earned, not demanded. And she'd failed to see the man beneath the wrench. The stars above shone indifferently, witnesses to a woman who'd learned too late. The house sold, Laura moved to a small apartment, the check funding a modest life, Cody. And Nate visited rarely, their calls strained. She kept the deed in a drawer, a reminder of her loss, and Tom S. freedom each night. She looked at the sky, wondering if he watched the same stars a man reborn while she lived with the ruins of her own making.